Perfect. Thanks a lot for coming after the break. I hope you can all hear me and see that I can check. Thanks for the feedback. My name is Christoph Strönadl. I am the CTO of Gaia-X. More about Gaia-X in a second, but you might wonder what the CTO does in an association, which you probably have heard about ecosystems, etc. And actually, the name of my presentation is symptomatic of what I do. We have this kind of conformity assessment data pipeline where we go from very early concept into production code, because eventually the CTO team is tasked with providing software for implementing such a conformity assessment to automate it. So that's kind of the CI/CD pipeline. But at the same time, conformity assessments starts at business rules. You will hear a lot about rule books, about data spaces and federation, and then that has to trickle down into code. So the CI/CD part is part of my responsibility. Of course, there is a team, and also translating, or the translation process from the business requirements to the code, and also back up if it comes to businesses. I have one remark about Gaia-X. If you have never heard about us, we have a very far-reaching vision, and that is concerned with ecosystems. But there are, with digital ecosystems, so first there are two types of ecosystems. One you know, and this is platform-based. You have a central platform operator and everyone hooks on that. Apple is, of course, an example, AWS. But we want to build decentralized ecosystems where you do not want to have a strong man in the middle. And the number one problem you have with that, that's in the highlighted the vision statement, is the trust. How can I trust my partner, my business colleague, if I do not have the central authority for trust? And there is one way, and this is, I love to be here with Eclipse, how to do that. And this is by creating open standards. So we are talking about trust framework standards, including, because this is essential for adoption, including open source software. Because if you just have the standard, you don't get adoption. If you just have software, which is incompatible, you don't get adoption. If we get both, we have adoption. That's not my actual experience. It's OMG, the object management group. If you want to read more about Gaia-X for your convenience, you can have the slides, just give me a note, or it will be available in the after part. If and when we want to create decentralized, trusted digital ecosystems, we had a look when we started that, what was being built, what was being tried for doing that in the past. And maybe not all of you know that, but ecosystems, digital data ecosystems in a central platform way emerged in the 1960s, 1970s, value-added network services. And this was called EDI. It was point-to-point, maybe mediated by a large platform. So the typical supply chain EDI, semiconductors, millions of records, that was in the 60s, 70s. Then we had, of course, with the advent of the internet, we have the platform businesses. Few-to-few was more bulletin-based services, if you like, but the few-to-many, you only have a couple of platforms in the middle, and then a lot of people who have to connect and have to trust the platform. This works, this scales enormously, but your rights are forfeited in many cases. This is why, especially if you go to the US platforms, this is why the European legislation has brought about GDPR to safeguard personal data, of course. Now, if we go to decentral ecosystems, where you do not have that platform owner in the middle, it would, of course, in a graph model, it would be, of course, easy to draw many-to-many. How do you do that? But how would that work in practice if every single of these connections you have to trust? How would you solve that trust problem in such a very arbitrarily connected ecosystem? And there are several ideas of the European Commission how to regulate these, even before we have the first ecosystem, the first data space established. So the Data Governance Act and the Data Act. So we have legislation before we have the technical infrastructure in place. And the only way how to scale from that, or how to jump, actually, it's more a quantum jump, how to jump from the platform model to the decentralized model is to standardize trust. So this is what CIS do, and my responsibility is to specify those trusts and implement it and make it implementable. Of course, we have then the AI Act, which could capitalize on that. But this is where we want to go. And CIS solves the technical, the trust questions. The businesses, the dots here, need to solve the business questions. What the hell are they doing in such an ecosystem? If it comes to trust, what trust-related problems do we have to solve? And please forgive the simple picture. This is a supply chain. We are not talking about supply chains, but due to the lack of space in PowerPoint, we are talking about many more of these entities in a supply network, in an arbitrary configuration. So this is just a small part of that. Because the supply chain, as you got to know in the previous page, that was solved with EDI 40 years ago. So we're not talking just about supply chain. There are two trust problems, actually, and one has to do with the participants. Can I trust my participant? And this is not just if I want to send you data or if I want to get from you data. It's also if I want to consume services from your side, or if we want to engage in a bilateral communication act. And we have called that first one related to the entities, the companies or the citizens who participate in such an ecosystem. We've called it entity-related trust. There is a CEN-CENELEC working group on trusted data transaction. So if you have all the potential trust interactions, the CEN-CENELEC working group only focuses on data exchange. And they called the same thing. They rediscovered what we also have been preaching as trust among data space participants. That is what I cover today mostly. And then the second part is transaction-related trust, which the CEN-CENELEC guys call trust in the data and the data transactions. Now there are two problems, and this is why it's a dilemma. There are two problems how to create, how to bring about that trust to happen. And the first one is for all the technical guys amongst us. We have a lot of partially proven, if you look at DLTs, partially not so proven, trust mediating standards. Key question here is, which one do we take in the ecosystem? Number one. And the second one is, what trust rules, when do we really trust on a business level other organizations? That's not a matter of X509 certificates or OAuth 2 or whatever, but what criteria does the other participant has to fulfill in order that I am able to trust that X509 certificate? Something like that. So we have that business trust problem and then the technical trust implementation problem. And if you reread my presentation 1 month earlier, this is the written summary of the whole presentation. So I'll just keep it in. So that's the abstract of what I'm going to tell you the next 10 or 15 minutes. And the only thing, the only prerequisite, which I not urge you, which we found very helpful in using when talking about trust, is the ISO 17000 standard. Because if you have credential, if you have compliance, if you have assertions, if you have claims, after some years, 1-2 years of struggling in terminology, we use the ISO 17000, the COSCO framework, because that once and for all solves the terminology, the business ontology of what it is, how do you mediate trust, what is a credential, what is a claim. We will need that if it comes to verifiable credential and the technical stuff. So I really advise you to go into that, so then you do not have to reinvent terminology. I will explain that in much more detail. The first thing when we started with an empty sheet of paper, and that was kind of 2020-ish, 2021, and you want to mediate trust, not just between ecosystems participants, but also between ecosystems themselves. How do you structure that? And there was a European interoperability framework with 4 layers, starting with legal interoperability. And honestly, we cannot totally solve that. We enable that to a certain degree. At the second layer, of course, we have organizational interoperability, when organizations trust each other within a given legal framework. Then you know that if you are a developer or a business analyst, we also need to get clear the terms we use in our communication and data. That's, of course, semantic interoperability. And finally, and the most uninteresting to the business guys, is technical interoperability. So that's a well-known framework in the context, developed in the context of public services. But we found it very useful because it allowed us to structure our approach. If you have 4 layers, how many teams do we need in order to cover that? How many documents, how many processes do you need? And we found that 2 layers, 2 documents, 2 specifications, if you want, suffice. You have 1 document, and we call it the GAIA-X compliance document, which talks about the business rules ecosystems and the participants must obey in order to be GAIA-X compliant. So the services must follow in order to be a GAIA-X compliant services. So you put legal and organizational interoperability into 1 set, into 1 document. That works. And the second one is the technical implementation, semantic with ontologies and all that. And this we put in several GAIA-X architecture documents because it's a matter of structure, but this is the technical one. And you can really neatly separate them. When it comes to the pipeline, you remember the CI/CD pipeline I mentioned in the beginning, there is 1 caveat to that simple distinction between 2 documents. I will make you aware of that. But that works. Independently from GAIA-X, the Database Support Center has also rediscovered that. They didn't use that framework, but they also have a 2-pronged, a 2-fold approach. Business rules on one side, and rule book it's called there, and the technical implementation. The Database Support Center doesn't care too much at this point in time about implementation, but they need the implementation as a second part of the game. So 2 documents. If we have those 2 documents, how would, and they specify some requirements and rules, of course, how would they look like? And I will start with the business document, with the compliance rule for services. So please narrow that down. It's vitally important that this label compliance document is only, I'm talking about, is only for services. So for offerings which one participant in a GAIA-X ecosystems offers to another. And the other, the service consumer, can of course consume then an AI service, an IoT service, a calculation service, and a virtual machine service. And what we do is we specify the business rules when a certain service, which is a cloud service, an IT service, when a certain service is either of standard compliance, label level 1, 2, 3. And you can see, if you can read that, for instance, if you want to have the latest, the highest compliance level, namely label level 3, you need your organization, which provides that service, need to be headquartered in Europe. So that's the Microsoft would never be able to be certified or compliant to that because it's of the Data Act and it's not headquartered in Europe. So these business requirements, you just have to list all of them, which is a tedious task but manageable. So you have a criterion P.1.5, the provider shall declare the general location, blah, 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 blah. And then you have also, this is just an exercise, this is just plain hard work. Then you specify, of course, for the individual label levels, how you attest it, how can you verify that the claim, I'm label level 3, which evidence can you provide and who can testify that you have really achieved it? Like with an ISO certificate, I can claim I'm ISO compliant as an organization, but everyone would ask me the certificate, who has audited you? You need these so-called conformity assessment bodies. And this is the business rule book called compliance document in GAIA-X. So we have that, and there are task force doing that. What's next? Because eventually, you remember the title, automated conformity assessment, eventually We want to have that conformity assessment done in code, done automatically. So the next step is that we take that business requirement, the compliance formulation, and translate it. And this is the committee. If you ever look into Gaia X, into the organization, the PRC, the Policy and Rules Committee, will do that. So it already gives you a kind of an organizational map where in a project you would allocate those tasks of writing such a document to. The translation process, and this is how it works, and I think we are the only one who specified that at all, is that we have an intermediate representation, like a very much structured requirements language, where you translate the business formulated, normal language formulated business rule into ontologies, into the specific classes where you implement that rule, because eventually it has to be implemented. And the naive software engineering student out of, I don't know, computer development, software engineering 101 would say, oh, I know who is going to do that translation, that's the business analyst. Of course, because you know that this is business, and then you have the technical requirement. This does not work. This is why we have jokingly, and this is by the team, by the CTO team, the role which is doing the translation. There is simply no single person on the earth which can fulfill the required roles, because translating that, as you can see, is a team effort. You need a compliance specialist, you need a software engineer, you need a requirements engineer. So we need, and we have tested that the last 1.5 years, we need 4 people, 4 different people to do that. And then it works fantastically. If you have other experience, and I would love to know if you can do it with 3, the business software handbooks tell you it's just a business analyst. Won't work. We have never seen that work. If you have that person, it would be magic. It would be a unicorn. But then you get such a implementation, a guideline for the software developers, for the software engineers to implement that. And that's done by the CTO team, of course, and that is software engineers. And you have, because we store the ontology in a meme graph, in a graph structure, you have the typical queries. And then you had the queries are executed in a software component which we call Gaia X compliance service. And that would be 1 or 2 software engineers. I'm cheating a little bit because not very often, but sometimes the software engineer has to go back to the business analyst and the tech team, to the legal compliance officer to clarify some things. So it's not just, I throw that document over the fence to the CTO team. It's more also here a kind of a mutual process. The software engineers in the driving seat here, but you have many kind of iterations here as well. And if someone knew me, I come from Software AG previously as a deputy CTO. And we sold, of course, rules engines, workflow engines. So I wondered, and I challenged the team, this is, of course, code. This is executable code. Can we provide kind of templates or a generic way how to implement business rules, like you know probably BRMS, business rules management systems. Can we provide that? And the answer was in principle yes, but the code of the rules and the rules engine will be much harder to read, and for the hard, if you don't have trivial rules like a table or a scorecard, which never, you look at the query, they are never so simple, the business rules, that they really fit in the table. So for the real business relevant rules, our, at least for the next time being approach is to code that, to have fast translation into software code. So no kind of rules engines, no abstraction layer on top of those ontologies, because eventually they will fail at the very hardest rules, and they are common in database ecosystem. It's our experience. I would love to hear alternative views on, not on the reality, on project requirements. So that's the third part. And with the compliance service, you can execute that. And there is an entity, the GAIX Digital Clearinghouses, which simply do that. And at the end, I will show you at the last slide how that looks in practice. I have two digressions, kind of what we found interesting also from a developer perspective. The left-hand column is how we implemented our trust framework. So this is the technical foundations, and you see the protocols, and we make sure that whatever protocols we use, that they are used somewhere else as well. So also on a European basis, of course, EUODI and other projects. And this is why we focus on OpenID for VC and for VP and that kind of stack. There is a competing, or not competing, a somewhat similar approach, but not the same. And this is the DCP, the Decentralized Claims Protocol. We did not do a total thorough analysis of that. It looks like maybe it could be maybe a profile for OpenID for Connect. I'm open to discussion for that. It also uses different protocols, but there is only one funded project which uses that, and this is Tractus-X. Of course, there is a large community of the automotive sector behind that, but there is the Eclipse Dataspace Working Group where we want to try to reconcile that, because eventually, honestly, we want to converge on a single standard. There is also a lively debate with the OpenID, with some guys of the OpenID, whether OpenID for VC supports machine-to-machine. And there are some pundits, some very straight guys and gals who say, no, it doesn't, which we believe to be completely wrong. You need to verify from time to time. There needs to be a human person in the loop. If you have a machine operating, I don't know, all the time, then once a month, once a week, you have to have a person sign and provide a credential to authorize the machine-to-machine flow. There will be a GAIX summit in Helsinki mid-November, where one of our CTO team members will have implemented all possible or all sensible machine-to-machine workflows using the vanilla OpenID for VC specification. So whoever then claims that it can't be done, machine-to-machine, service-to-service communication with OpenID, we have the code, and I love to invite everyone for a detailed discussion with my team member on whether that works, whether this is according to spec or not, because eventually it's the code and the specification. So we are sorting that out, because eventually, if you are an ecosystem participant and you are not on the technical level, but on the organizational level, you have a supply chain, you have just in time, you have a team responsible for the lorries, for the trucks, you don't care about the protocol. You just want software implementing whatever is necessary to be able to interact with other ecosystems. So my task is to implement that, to find a way how to consolidate and to integrate, to converge in all the protocols. And if no one in 1 or 2 years asks about the protocol and we have production, then this is success, actually. And the second one is, I mentioned briefly the ontologies. We have, of course, a rigid ontology modeled in various forms, and we used or the teams used LinkML for specifying the ontology. And the major reason for using LinkML and not just native RDF or native OWL is that you can generate a lot of additional formats which we use. For instance, the meme graph or the Shekel shapes, the definitions of the shapes of the ontology, these are vitally important for the automation process. Now, if we would not use LinkML, we would need to maintain 3 different sets of artifacts, which all relate to the same ontology, of course. So it's much better for us, in that case, to have a common generator and people understand LinkML and use that very well. We actually integrated that also with more like a CI/CD pipeline, because eventually, if we have an ontology, we want to register that somewhere in a registry with a permanent name, because that's part of how the services, how compliant with Gaia-X takes its trust that the ontology against which service definitions are checked is publicly available in the Gaia-X registry, which is another software component we release. You can visit us at our booth in the main hall if you want to know more about that. Because the publicity of the ontology is required in order to allow everyone, not just clearinghouses or governance authorities, to allow everyone to check whether the service description conforms to that ontology or not. This is a well-known publication or trust ensuring mechanism. So Hyperledger, Indy, and Aries do the same, essentially, just on a blockchain. With that, I come to the final synthesis of all of that. Why do we do that at all? Why do we have a compliance service? Why do we even care about Gaia-X label level 1, label level 2 for some services? And the idea is to form, and you remember the initial slide, the second slide, to enable the building of decentralized trusted ecosystems. And part of that trust is for the services the participants provide. So we have Gaia-X is not a cloud. We don't provide those services. So T-Systems provides, I don't know, Software AG provides Cumulosity IoT services. If you know that your service is compliant to the business rules, so if you know that because you have a service description, you have a service endpoint, you comply to GDPR, you are ISO certified, all the 50 rules or so which are written in the compliance document, if you know you have that, and you can put that into a JSON file, which we call service credential. Then you submit that to so-called Gaia-X digital clearinghouses, which are special trusted entities, not one, but several. And ecosystems are free to define them, whom you trust. They are also free to define what they put into the compliance document. So you can make your own rules. You can make your own digital clearinghouses for your ecosystems. The idea is that the ecosystem clearinghouses also follow a technical specification. You remember the OpenID for VC versus TCP protocol. So you need to make sure that all the clearinghouses implement the same technical standard. The services comply to the same business rules. The clearinghouses implement the same technical framework, because if you do that and the service providers submit a naked service credential to the clearinghouse, the clearinghouse can take, and we call that a trust framework, a completely automated tool chain and check whether the service characteristic you put in as a service provider conforms to the rules or not. And if they do, you get a labeled credential. So an attestation that your claim to be Gaia-X compliant for that service is correct. And the Gaia-X Digital Clearinghouse has signed that, or one of those which you have nominated. And that then creates the list or the offer of trusted services. Because every, the check mark, every of these single services, I don't know, Kubernetes, email, IoT, AI, large language model, whatever you can conceive in the XaaS continuum, edge services as well, is then certified to be Gaia-X compliant to whatever the level of the label. And that then is the input or the realization of a trusted, decentralized ecosystem. Many of those Gaia-X digital clearinghouses may exist. The standards, the technical standards need to be defined, and the business rules need to be defined. The rest can be fully automated. This is compliance automation. This works today. I'm happy if you try me or us. I'm happy to show that. I have a technical member of the team with me in the booth. So of course I don't show you the whole tool chain, but we could do that outside. So this is how we completely automate compliance checking. No human in the loop. Everything is published, so available for trust, the mechanisms, the standard, and that's, I think, the only way how decentralized ecosystems can emerge, that you share the foundations of the trusts, including the trust anchors, and then independently, every potential user of a service can check. If you don't trust the GAIA-X Digital Clearinghouse, you can check yourself. So this is the ultimate kind of, how shall I say, not proof, it's the ultimate possibility in a not so trustful environment. And we believe, and we are pitching that, of course, also to other GAIA-X project and data space support center projects, to use that twofold approach with the technical GAIA-X trust framework for mediating, for enabling, for ensuring decentralized, trusted ecosystems, as opposed to the US-centric single platforms. Thanks for your attention. I don't know, can you give me the questions? I don't know. I don't think so, no. But if you have any questions, I will be at the booth somewhere in the hall, at the GAIA-X booth. So please ask me, or write me an email or pinch me somewhere on Twitter. You can, of course, have the slides. If the conference does not give you. Thanks for the attention. Looking forward to see you maybe in Helsinki or in any other trusted ecosystem, maybe in 2025. Thanks.